They constructed it, and the contractor actually got the dimensions wrong. So the base of those arches ended up in the middle of a doorway, right? To the rooms themselves, and they had to be off to the
Yes.
side so people could actually walk into the room. And I was like, oh my God, there's no way I can waste so much steel. We can't lose project time on this, right? But it was working on site and finding a solution. And what I found beautiful is like the structural engineer was there. Me as a designer was there. We had the mechanical engineer because obviously we had air conditioning and all sorts of stuff in the ceiling as well. So working together and through, the varied experience and expertise of so many different individuals, we came up with a solution and we salvaged that problem rather than being like, oh God. And I found that very beautiful. That art of collaboration, of
Hmm.
human collaboration and human expertise coming together to resolve something, that's magic.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, a podcast about how beauty works in our world and shapes the work that we do. This episode is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. More about them later in the show. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so thrilled to welcome my guest today, my good old friend, Pallavi Dean. Pallavi founded her design firm Roar in 2013 as an architect and sustainability specialist. Her recent work includes the Accor House of Originals in Dubai, the Sensasia Spa at Kempinski Dubai and Mckinsey headquarters in Doha. A former professor of design, Pallavi strives to implement the latest theoretical and practical research into her firm's designs. Pallavi was named Architectural Digest Middle East Designer of the Year in 2020 and Designer of the Year globally by Interior Design Magazine in 2021. Congratulations on those. And Pallavi, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We just saw each other a couple of months ago at this conference we organized. And I've admired you for years and years, like 25 years or something. It's a pleasure to be able to chat a little bit further. Tell me about where you grew up and what role, say, beauty in architecture or design played in your childhood as you were growing up.
Yeah, look, I grew up in the UAE, right? So I'm Indian. I've never lived in India. So it was kind of always that third culture kid, do I really fit
Yeah.
in? And when you're a child, it's interesting the things that you notice. And that question about beauty in architecture is very important because I remember I had a little window. My first memory of architecture is having a little window in my bedroom and just staring out at the clouds and watching them move and create these different formations. And I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Or the way the light would sometimes hit the floor surface, right? Those were kind of my first interactions with architecture and beauty, and they were very early on. Like I remember being 6 or 7 and having these vivid experiences.
Wow. Did they draw you to want to be an architect or a designer? So we met each other in school and like were you aspiring to a career in design at that point?
They always say that in an Indian family, you kind of have to live out your parents' dreams. So my father always
Uh-huh.
wanted to be an architect, right? And he
Wow.
ended up being a contractor. And as a child, obviously, he got me all the right toys. Lego was a huge feature in our house. There was all the mechanics, mechano stuff, right? Where you would kind of screw together stuff and build it. So that whole building and creating stuff, he was an artist as well. So I used to when all the other kids were out there playing on Fridays, which was our weekend back then, I was in art class. So I think he kind of put that into
Yeah.
my head, ingrained it into my DNA maybe very early on. So I never thought I'd be an architect, but I knew it had to be a creative pursuit.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And then so how did you then end up pursuing a career in design? What led to that?
So I actually started university as a visual communications or a graphic design major.
Hmm.
And I remember in foundation year, they throw everyone together and they're like, oh, this is a great social experiment. Let's see what happens. And I remember all my work, instead of being two-dimensional, was three-dimensional. So the professors were like, hang on a second, I think you need to switch majors. And I was like, no, never.
Huh.
My father wants me to be an architect. No way. I'm going to be a graphic designer and rebel. Um, but as fate would have it, there were so many mentors pushing me into this direction. And I would say they influenced that choice. And I have
Hmm.
never looked back since because three-dimensional form really is, kind of, I think, what I was born to do in many ways.
Huh. Are there any exemplars of beautiful architecture or beautiful design that really struck you as a child that sort of, captivated your imagination and maybe even shaped the kind of work you do?
Yeah, I just remember going into religious spaces, right? We grew up very secular. So, going into either a mosque or a temple or a church. And I remember sort of that scale and the impact
Hmm.
that it had on people. People would just immediately become respectful, become
Hmm.
introspective, become quiet. And I was like, wow, there's a three-dimensional space that is influencing behavior, or it gives you that sense of wow, something is there. It
Hmm.
either evokes spirituality through its scale, it evokes reverence through its form.
Yeah.
And I think as a child, those were kind of my first memories of architecture influencing behavior.
Okay. And so then, I mean, are there ways in which you build in some of those kinds of principles into the work you do?
Absolutely. I mean,
Hmm.
with the work that we do, it's very empathy based. It's very user experience driven. So I always kind of journey my user through the space and I think, oh, when that person turns this corner, what is it that they see? What can make them pause? What can make them reflect? Or what can
Yeah.
speed up that journey, right? So I'm constantly thinking about how they traverse through that space and how I can very subtly kind of influence that. I always say that
Hmm.
architects are a little bit like bullies. They
Hmm.
make you almost, they're puppeteers. They make you perform through a space.
Aha.
Think about walking through an airport, how a travelator
Right.
slows you down or speeds you up. And I've always been fascinated by that.
Wow. Great. Great. Well, talk about some of the work you've done and what you might consider, striving for beauty or examples of beauty that you try to create and generate in your work.
See, for me, it's always beauty is not just something that, you know, um, pleases your eyes. It has to
Hmm.
evoke and kind of engage all five senses. And I find
Hmm.
that when something is truly beautiful, it does that. It engages
Hmm.
all five of your senses and it stays with you as a memory, as in a sense, much longer after that moment. So in my work, that's what I try to do. I don't just think about creating aesthetically pleasing spaces. I think about creating spaces that engage, like, that are tactile. So it engages your sense of touch. I think of spaces
Hmm.
of how to incorporate natural elements so that it can stimulate kind of your nasal glands as well. So it's about engaging those five senses and just always being true to the user experience. I think that is the key.
Hmm. Great. You had, the symposium that you were at a couple of months ago. You talked about a tension between form and function, and then that was something that you've encountered in your work. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how that relates to this concept of beauty?
Yeah, look, when you are an architect, I think it's your responsibility to do both, right? Your space
Hmm.
has to be functional and it has to be poetic to look at. And I think, when I was a young architect, I was like, yeah, of course, I can have both. But I think now, 20 years on, I realize for those completely out of the box, creative, innovative, poetic spaces, sometimes function is compromised. And how is it compromised? It's either compromised through the economics, because those spaces are very beautiful. My favorite architect, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid. People look at the architecture from the outside and they're like, wow, stunning. And I do too. But there are some unusable spaces on the inside. They are challenging projects to
Hmm.
build structurally. So I think, when you are pursuing true beauty, which can really have that sense of, wow, takes my breath away. Maybe sometimes you have to compromise function. And I think I'm starting to uh, float in that gray area now. I'm not thinking of things as black and white.
Hmm. Right, right, right. I mean, so how do you make that decision as to when to compromise form and when to compromise function?
In my work, I try and always prioritize function, right? Because form, you
Okay.
look at form for like 5 minutes or, 10 minutes.
Uh-huh.
We spend 89% of our time inside experiencing
Yeah.
the space, right? So I will always create some aha or wow moments. But for me in my work, I would say it's still 90% function and 10% form. And sometimes the form results from the function. So I'm not saying that the 90% is
Hmm.
boring or uninviting visually. I'm just saying that it's not perhaps as poetic as the work of Zaha Hadid or Frank Gehry, all of my idols, Thomas Heatherwick, because
Right.
sometimes I have to think about the economics, and
Yeah.
my client's budget.
Yeah. And you don't want something that looks great but doesn't actually work for their purpose, right? So
Absolutely.
the other tension that had come up in our conversation was around perfection and imperfection, let's say, right? Because a lot of people associate beauty with that kind of ideal, and you're talking about, the ideal of those sort of exemplary architects. Um, but there's also, I think you pointed to the beauty of brokenness, things like wabi sabi, and um, tell us more about that kind of tension in your work. And do you ever find yourself in some way valorizing imperfection or highlighting it?
Absolutely. I think as humans, we are flawed, right? So anything that I create is going to be flawed. My biggest inspiration is nature. There's not a single straight line in nature. Okay. So people think of perfection as we got to get these clean, straight lines. Everything has to be, super symmetrical. Yes, nature has symmetry, but it's slightly imbalanced, kind of like my face. It's slightly imbalanced. But I think that from that imperfection is where a conversation can start. When I look at a
Mm.
rough surface, an unhoned, fractured kind of marble, sometimes I put that as and celebrate it on a reception desk where someone else might chase like that perfect piece of marble. But I think, oh my God, this marble's had a life. It's come from a quarry. It's traveled a long way. No one's going to use it. That's not right. So for me, you have to celebrate that imperfection because it also reminds you that you can take the pressure off yourself and allow your flaws to shine. And I think it's
Mm.
one of, is it Rumi's quotes? I don't know who wrote it, but it's, when you're broken, the light shines through. And I love that. I love that saying about imperfection.
Mm.
So I celebrate it in my work. I don't always have the glitzy, shiny things. Sometimes I put broken tiles in my work just so that it celebrates the journey of the project.
Wow, great. You sent us a few images. Now, this our listeners won't be able to see this unless they go onto our YouTube channel. But could you talk us through to those images and what it was that you found striking or important about them?
Yeah, I send you a lot of work in progress images, right? I send you images of one of our team members, a construction team member, laying down the carpet. Now, everybody looks at that as such a, useless task. But for me, he was sitting there for hours, making sure all the patterns would align because I'm so OCD. I was like, please
Mm.
just make sure all the patterns align in one certain direction. So he was carefully checking out the direction and laying it down. And I found that so beautiful, like that joy and that pride that he was taking in the work and also honoring my feelings. So that's one of the images I sent you. And the others are just me at a workshop or me on site. For me, beauty is almost that process of iteration. I think that's where beauty comes in from. It comes through those hours that you spend honing and crafting, and not just the finished product or the project. It's that iterative process. So those are kind of the images. That's what they speak to. For me, beauty is an iterative process. It's a work in progress, much like us as humans. We're always
Yeah,
trying to evolve, develop, better ourselves. So that's kind of where I was
yeah,
at with
yeah.
those images.
Yeah, I know this that's really I think that's really important to think about. When I talk to scientists who have, studied a lot about the role of beauty in science, this sort of iterative nature of the scientific quest is really something that everyone talks about, but not as a space where they find beauty. For a lot of them, that's where the ugliness and messiness and frustration comes in. And that for a lot of people is, having to deal with failure when something doesn't quite go the way you want it to, or dealing with the unexpected. Um, Talk more about the process. I mean, what is that experience like for you, and what does it look like, and where exactly is the beauty in that? But is there also pain? Is there also suffering? Is there also ugliness?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say pain and ugliness is the flip side of beauty, right? So you can't have one without the other. They're two sides of the coin. And I think you can only appreciate beauty of the end result by going through the pain and suffering. You,
Hmm.
you, you nailed it, right? Frustration. Of course, through any creative process, right? You're putting a piece of you out there. So you're being so vulnerable. Now, sometimes your ideas, you try and test them and they don't work. And you got to restart and you got to rethink, or you have to convince someone and sell your idea. So that process is very painful and it's quite emotionally exhausting because it's so much of you that's gone into this work. But at the same time, like I said, you can't have one without the other. I think they balance
Mm.
each other out. You can't have perfection without appreciating imperfection, and you can't have beauty without going through the pain of the process. So for me, the process is just integral to the design.
Mm.
Everybody's like, oh, let's just get to the finish line. And I'm like, no, there's no way you're going to learn anything by just getting to the finish line. Or you won't even appreciate the finish line if you don't appreciate this present moment and the process that we're in right now.
Yeah. Do you have a memory of any one particular project where the process really stood out to you as sort of a place where you encountered something beautiful, right? Anything that where you could walk us through that journey and show us a little bit of where the beauty was.
Yeah, look, we were designing a spa. I think you spoke about it in the Kempinski Hotel. And I wanted,
Mm.
in my head, I was stuck on this vision, these gigantic arches that create an internal courtyard that lead into the spa rooms. Now, that was a nightmare to construct. They constructed it, and the contractor actually got the dimensions wrong. So the base of those arches ended up in the middle of a doorway, right? To the rooms themselves, and they had to be off to the
Yikes.
side so people could actually walk into the room. And I was like, oh my God, there's no way I can waste so much steel. We can't lose project time on this, right? But it was working on site and finding a solution. And what I found beautiful is like the structural engineer was there. Me as a designer was there. We had the mechanical engineer because obviously we had air conditioning and all sorts of stuff in the ceiling as well. So working together and through, the varied experience and expertise of so many different individuals, we came up with a solution and we salvaged that problem rather than being like, oh God. And I found that very beautiful. That art of collaboration, of
Mm.
human collaboration and human expertise coming together to resolve something, that's magic.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Um, there's a another I mean important challenge I suppose that for a lot of people in trying to particularly do design is to convey this principle of what our friend Anjan Chatterjee calls hominess. I mean, this idea of being able to feel at home.
Yeah.
That's one of the sort of key principles for hospitality in any kind of space. How do you convey that? What does that mean to help people feel at home, either in a hotel or in a restaurant or in any of the even an office? Like, how do you do that?
I think the most important thing is always going back to my basic principle, which is engaging the five senses and working through empathy. Okay. So
Mm.
that's the core of any space that we design, whether it's a hospital, whether it's an office, whether it's a hotel. Okay. So if you start from that point, which is empathy driven, understanding what the user needs are, what the user experiences, and how to engage them, you can't ever go wrong. This idea of hominess or feeling the sense of calm or sanctuary is very important in the space. So I go back to the evidence-based design where you
Mm.
spend 89% of your time indoors. So you really have to have this sense of calmness when you're in the space. Now, a lot of people design these perfect institutional spaces that are show homes, but you just never feel comfortable because you feel like if I put my feet up on the coffee
Yeah.
table, it's it's just someone's going to, a robot's going to come and eject me out of my seat or
Right,
something.
right, right.
And that's where the imperfection comes in. We just recently designed a wellness center. So people go in for rehab therapy, for psychiatric treatments. And
Mm.
one of the big things the psychologist was telling me, please don't design a perfect space. It has to be
Mm.
imperfect. It has to be rough around the edges so that people can feel like who they are, flawed. So I think
Mm.
those homey
Mm.
spaces
Mm.
also have to have that a sense of imperfection so people can feel at rest. And
Mm.
and and,
Mm. Oh,
and
yeah.
besides that, adding biophilic elements, natural tones, neutral backgrounds, reducing the visual noise, all of these are other tricks that we use to convey that.
Great, great. Your work has won numerous awards, and then that's fantastic. Do you have a sense of like what is it that when people are honoring your work, what are they resonating with? What is it that makes your work exceptional? And are there any sort of threads that tie it together that characterize your particular creative vision?
Look, when I was a young designer, all I wanted was the awards, right? I just wanted a pat on the
Ah,
back. I just wanted someone to tell me that I was good enough. Now, 20 years later, as I get older, I've stopped believing in the awards, right? Because I believe that if, 1 year I win an award and they're celebrating me, well done, Pallavi. And then the next year I don't win the award. Does that mean I haven't done well that year? No.
Mm-hmm.
So I've developed my own barometer, my own yardstick of success, which is not the awards, which is my repeat clients. So we have 90%
Ah,
repeat business, right?
wow.
So some of it is related to, you said, what is it that makes our work so special? It's all of those things: empathy, user-based experience design. It's evidence-based. We use a psychologist in our briefing. So we also make sure the clients get exactly what they want, engaging the five
Mm.
senses. Okay, so that's the common thread. I don't have a signature style. My projects look
Mm.
very varied. One can be modern, one can be classical, one can be super futuristic, but they do have a common
Mm.
design philosophy, which is on my
Mm.
principles, right? But for me, what the real win in life is that repeat client. And that, more than design, 80% of my job is sales. It's building that connection
Mm.
with the client. It's building that rapport. It's building that human connection where I'm actually delivering to their needs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's really striking. I mean, I've been thinking about the sort of dimensions of what makes work beautiful for people, right? And so part of it is certainly the products that you generate, and you can talk about the aesthetic principles in the various products and designs you develop, and then we've talked about process a bit. We've talked about just that journey. And people are a huge component of what makes work beautiful, right, for us. And so could you talk to me, you've spoken a bit about your clients. What is your team like? How do you recruit? Who are the kinds of people that you want to work with? What is your philosophy of trying to create a company or a community of folks who are working with you?
Yeah, so our company is called Roar, right? So we're 92% female. So I would say we're like a real tribe. We're like a little pack of lionesses and a few lions in there as well. Um, so what do I look for? I always say that one thing they don't teach you at university is emotional intelligence. Like, that
Mm.
that those soft skills, which I think are so important in my job, because at the end of the day, I'm a consultant. I really have to listen more than I speak. So when I'm hiring people, that's what I look for, because I think I can teach you software. I can even teach you some
Mm.
basics of space planning and design, but I really can't teach you to be a nice human being. So I
Right.
always start from there. If you're a decent human being, and Brandon, hopefully you'll come out to Dubai this year and you'll come and see my studio. We're just a bunch of feel good, happy people. And sometimes people are like, and there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of candor in our office. And sometimes people come in and they're like, are you sure you're professional enough? I'm like, yeah, we've built 300 projects. You can be nice and think you're funny, but not actually so funny. And you can still be professional. So that's kind of the environment that my team has. And I think all my colleagues are very much part of the work tribe and work family for me.
How did you develop this idea of Roar? Like, how did that concept come about, and what influenced that?
So I think, when I first started the company 10 years ago, yeah, it was called Pallavi Dean Interiors. And, it was just me freelancing from my guest bedroom. And then we won a hotel. So it just snowballed. I didn't intend to create a
Ah.
company, right? It snowballed into what it is today. And then I thought it was kind of unfair having my name on the door, because there was so many other creatives in that contributed to, the story
Mm.
of our designs. And then I was like, okay, so, we had like a little workshop and we're like, we're feminine, we're super powerful. We had this term at the time, we have interiors with a bite. And I was like, oh, we just brainstormed and we came up with Roar. And then I was a huge, and I still am a huge Katy Perry fan. So I was like, dude, there's even a
Ah.
song about our company. This is great.
This is great. You got an anthem.
Yeah.
The other element of beauty at work is that I've been thinking about is purpose and why people do what they do. You talked about your design philosophy a little bit, but could you say a bit more about the why behind your work and particularly how that's evolved over time? What is it today compared to where you started? Why do you do what you do, and where do you hope to go with it?
Okay, so the first why, and I'm going to be very honest, is very selfish, because I couldn't do anything else, Brandon. I would make a terrible accountant. Okay, so
Right, right,
part of it is
right.
just my own selfish desire and my passion for creativity. Okay, so that's where it kind of started. And then the why, when I was working for big companies, it was always pens down, clients not paying us, the fees not enough, you can't keep designing. So that's why I set up by myself, because I was like, no, I want to give this person who's come to me the best possible version of the space and put 500% into it, right? So that's why I started the firm.
Mm.
And again, when I first started, it was all about sustainability for me. No one was doing it at that time. So I was like, I have to make sure that I'm also saving the environment, because that's one of my values in life. Or not saving, I don't think I'm that, yeah, it sounds very narcissist. I couldn't save the entire environment, but I wanted to do my bit. And
Sure.
that's kind of how it started, specifying the right products, because I had a lot of allergies, so I wanted to make sure there was zero VOC paints,
Mm.
lots of things like that. And that all started. But now, as I progressed, all of those things are basic, right? We do them anyways. And now it's more about empathy driven design, which I see so lacking, because everything is very ego and signature driven in my world. And I want to stop that. I want it to be about the client, not so much about the star architect.
Right, right, right. Um, and so looking forward, are there particular kinds of projects that you want to accomplish, or um, is there sort of dream for where you want Roar to to be in the future, or what you would like to accomplish or contribute to?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball gazing sort of attitude. I'm very present moment
No.
focused, So I always like
Mm.
to take stock of where I am, and I'm so grateful for where we are. We're working on two mosques currently. So
Mm.
they are first religious spaces. So I'm very excited. The
Wow.
story I told you at the beginning, my first experience with architecture was in a religious space. So it's almost like full circle. I'm bringing it back home.
Uh-huh.
And the other thing, like if it ever happens in the future, my biggest ambition is to design and create a wellness retreat center,
Huh.
for rehabilitation. So I would love to be involved in a project like that.
Wow, wow, great. Talk a bit about working in Dubai. There are a lot of people I've talked to designers and architects in different cities, and one of the things some of them are really interested in is sort of figuring out how design can contribute to improving the city and sort of making a mark on the city, but also changing behavior around how communities come together, how to make the city a better space. What is it like to work in Dubai, first of all, and what is this sort of scope for design and reshaping the city and its future?
Look, Dubai gets such a bad rep, right? Everybody's like, oh my God, here goes another Guinness Book World Record. They want to build the flashiest, boldest, brightest. And okay,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I will admit there is an element of that. But within that, every city wants to do that when they're putting themselves on the map. Dubai is a very young city, and UAE is a very young country. Think of Singapore 20 years ago. So there was a bit of that. But now there's a lot of sensibility because we are creating our own design voice. First, it was a borrowed design voice from Hong Kong or Singapore or London or New York. But now Dubai has got its own identity. And almost instead of importing styles and designs from, from the Western
Mm.
world, we are creating our own design language and exporting it. So you look at the Museum of the Future, a beautiful piece of architecture, an iconic piece of architecture, which has Arabic calligraphy all over it. So it's very exciting to be in a city which is ambitious, which is future focused, but also willing to understand different voices. It's such a multicultural
Mm.
society. So there's so many different influences. So I would say it's a very exciting place to practice architecture.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about that aspect of this um, what a sort of homegrown, Dubai-grown perspective on design could look like elsewhere? I mean, so if you can imagine in a few years, Dubai-based architects doing projects around the world, would there be anything sort of distinctive that comes from this environment? Any particular aesthetic principles, or what would help us recognize the influence of this particular architectural style? What would that look like?
You know, I hope if Dubai architects like us, and we are practicing in many parts of the world, Dubai,
Yeah,
besides Dubai, we're in London, Tanzania, Uganda, India, Pakistan, name it, right? I
yeah.
would hope that you would see no distinguishing factors because if you're truly a
Ah,
good architect, you will respect the context where your project
right,
is. And it should not be something that's Dubai based. It should be
right,
specific
right.
to that site, that context, that brief. I think the one thing that all of us who practice in Dubai have is a very We won't take no for an answer kind of attitude. We always find a solution. And the other thing is, I've worked in London as well. We work at a breakneck speed and pace. And I don't think
Mm.
anybody can challenge a company based in Dubai in architecture and design that works at the pace that we work at. So I think those would be the
Right,
two
right.
things. But design wise, I hope there's nothing that distinguishes us.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, the breakneck pace is a bit worrisome from a well-being perspective. No, is that how do you find balance, and how do you think about rest and making sure you don't burn out and all that stuff?
Yeah, look, I think balance, everybody talks about this work-life balance. There is no balance. They
Right, right.
coexist. So it's up
Yeah.
to you to decide how they coexist, right? So you work hard and you play hard. So you work, yes, there's breakneck speed, but if you're efficient, if you're productive, and if
Mm.
you kind of time and manage your day properly. I leave work at 5 p.m. every day, so does my team. It's nine to
Right,
five and we're
right.
out of the office, but
Yeah.
we're efficient with our time. So we have deep work hours. I don't allow anyone to use their emails or their phones, Instagram, social media, all that crap for 2 hours in the morning. I'm like, get your creative work done, and then you can get on your social media accounts. So I think we get so sucked into social media, into the news, into all of this stuff that we're not efficient with our day. When you stop
Mm.
that distraction and that noise, you actually realize you don't need to work overtime. You can get stuff done.
That's great. That's great. Talk also a little bit about the space in which you guys work. I mean, of course, when you're on site, it's a different thing, but your just even the design of your own company and how you've thought about that and what that does when it comes to the way you all work.
Yeah. Look, I started in a guest bedroom, in my spare bedroom, right? So my ambition
Uh,
in life as a architect was always I wanted a warehouse that I could convert and make my own. And then
uh,
about a year ago, this warehouse in this arts district in Dubai came up. And I was like, oh my God, it's a no-brainer. This has been my dream. So it was a bit of a leap of faith because it was a massive budget because I put floors into the warehouse. I refurbished the entire space. So the space is super neutral. It's a blank canvas because I, again, didn't want the visual noise when me and the designers were working on other projects. It's open plan. It's got a beautiful sample library. It's got lots of closed spaces where you can do your deep work and your calls, etc. But it's a very creative environment. It's a very voluminous space. And I read somewhere that Pixar, I think Ed Catmull talks about it. He says that, when you have a space more than 10 feet high, your creativity triples. And I'm like, great.
mm.
That is what's going to justify my investment and return on investment while I did this refurb.
And did it work?
I think so. I think we're much stronger today than we were a year ago. But of course, I have to tell myself those lies as I pay off that loan that I took for the fit out, right?
No, I mean I've heard this before that I mean I interviewed an architect before who talked about how yeah double height ceilings and so on are able to create more of a sense of cohesion. You really feel you are in the same space with others, even if you're on different floors and so on. And yeah, no, that's fantastic. Any other sort of big things you're looking forward to, either in the immediate future or long term? What is for you like sort of a beautiful career, right? Like, what would that look like to you down the road?
I think I've had a beautiful career, and I'm
Hmm.
having it right now. I just hope for more of the same. I don't think there's anything that I want that I don't have. I've just finished my MBA, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break from education before I start my PhD. So I'm looking forward to kind of doing that. I want to do a PhD in psychology of design, which is a
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you liked that video, please hit that thumbs up button and share it with your friends. Also, please take a second to hit the subscribe button because it really helps us out. Thanks.